Hello and welcome to my latest video. So in this video we're going to be painting this Space Marine as a Blood Angel, but he was painted for a charity event for mental health as part of Movember, and part of the criteria for painting him was that I had to use Troll Slayer Orange, which is quite a challenging paint to use at the best of times. So turning him into a Blood Angel was something that I had to do a little bit of tweaking to make it work. To start with, I'm going to be stippling the whole model, so I'm using an Artist Opus small dry brush, and I'm using Mephiston red. And I'm just doing this so I can get a base colour down over the model. By the time the model is finished at the end of the video, and you should have seen as well in the thumbnail for the piece, he looks a lot more orange, but you just need to get a base colour down, because if you go straight in with the orange to start with, one, Troll Slayer Orange is just not going to cover very well at all. And two, it's going to look really muddy and horrible because the orange will, well, it's quite a translucent colour, and the black primer will just make it look worse. So I'm using Mephiston red, as I said. You'll notice that it's on a wet palette. So the way that I do this stippling is it's quite thin paint that I work with, so it's around about 50-50 water to paint. And then the brush is also damp, so it's not dry brushing in any traditional kind of sense, but it does cover the model very, very quickly, and it gives this nice sort of even pattern all over. It means that you don't get the sort of very clinical look of an airbrush, but you still cover the model very, very quickly and easily, so it's quite nice for army painting. You will need to wash the brush off every now and then while you're carrying on with the stippling. When you do that, make sure that you make an effort to dry the brush a reasonable amount, because even though it's a small dry brush, it's quite a large brush comparatively, and if you wash it off in the pot and then kind of just rub it like you normally would on your kitchen roll or whatever it is, and then go straight back to stippling, the paint will flood off of the brush onto the model, so you do need to have a little bit of control with how you apply the paint. You'll also find that just because of the nature of the size of the brush, it's quite hard to get into some of the recesses. So I used a size 3 Artist Opus M brush. So they're just like short brushes. I wouldn't recommend using anything expensive really to do that. It's just a brush that I happen to have laying around, but like a small sort of chunky brush that you can kind of jab into the recesses will help a lot, just to make sure that you've not just got black primer left. It will kind of even out through the processes that I use as I go along, but it will just make it look a little bit better if you can fill in some of those darker areas that you can't reach with the dry brush. After you've covered the model in the Mephiston red, I've then used Scarlet Blood, from Vallejo, so it's a game colour piece. One of the reasons that I wanted to use this was, one, I just wanted to try it out. It's quite a nice vibrant red as well, but it also has a slightly more matte finish. If you've seen some of my videos before where I've used this kind of technique, I tend to cover the model in matte varnish at the end, and honestly I just couldn't be bothered to do it with this model, so I thought if I just use some more matte style paint in there, then that will solve some of those issues, so it's not too shiny. Having said that, the Troll Slayer Orange is a kind of satin paint, so what you're going to end up with is something that's a little bit satin in some places and more matte in others, but I will be just flooding the model with Dark Oath Flesh contrast paint anyway, which is also kind of matte. I mean, ultimately it doesn't matter too much. You could use Evil Sun's Scarlet as an alternative, but really I just wanted to try out the paint, and it's pretty effective and it covers nicely. So when you're applying this, you're doing exactly the same thing as you did with the Mephiston red, but you're focusing more on the light placement. So the front of the shoulder pads, the front of the face, and the top of the chest. The nice thing is you don't have to worry about those areas in the recesses that you couldn't get to with the dry brush this time, because they're just left in shadow now. So just take your time. You have to be a little bit more careful with the brush movements this time compared to when you applied the Mephiston red, because when you do the Mephiston red you can just smash the paint on and not worry too much about it. This time you're trying to focus a little bit more and be controlled with the position of the brush, like dabs as it hits the model. You should notice as well, as I'm applying it to the model, that I'm trying to keep the brush angled straight onto the model, so don't be tempted to use the brush at an angle, and don't do any dry brush motions. It's purely just dabbing straight on. You can also see that I'm already up to the Troll Slayer orange at this stage, and this is also watered down around about 1:1 water to paint. Make sure you wash off the brush in between the Scarlet Blood before you start using the Troll Slayer orange, and you're probably going to find that the Troll Slayer orange just doesn't have great coverage when you start working it, which means that you do have to do multiple passes over it. So what you should do is focus on one area, paint that in, and then just carry on around the model, picking out the highlight points, and then by the time you finish that and you get all the way around back to the starting point, the paint will be dry. You can carry on working on it again, and also because of the translucency, it means it will blend better. So even if your highlight layer of the Scarlet Blood hasn't been that great, you can sort of blend some of the transitions a little bit better with the Troll Slayer, because it'll just be like a softer kind of effect overall. Now, if you don't want an orange marine, you could probably get away with just working up from the Scarlet Blood, maybe adding like a touch of white and yellow to it. So you have to be, it depends on what sort of balance you want. If you want a slightly more pinkish look to the armor, then just use white. If you want a more orangey look, you can obviously use the Troll Slayer orange, but that's very orange. So the reason I say the white and yellow is it makes it a little bit, like, it's only tiny amounts just to lighten it up, but the yellow just takes the edge off the pink look to it. So by that stage you should have something that looks like this. I focus more on the front for the lighting on the model, and you'll see why as it gets darker, because I'm going to be pushing the contrast so it looks more orange as well as we go around, so contrast from light to dark. But at this stage now you can forget about the stippling effect, and we're now painting in the metal parts, and this is kind of like the boring, well for me anyway, this is always the boring bit, painting all the trim on, and it's kind of like why I prefer painting the Mark 6 Marines, but I do really like the look of these Mark 3 guys. So it's up to you. You could use this painting technique on the Mark 6 Space Marines as well, or indeed like the Primaris Marines. Like the technique works fine on all the types of armor. It's just that you'll be able to paint a lot more models more quickly using this technique on things that aren't covered in trim, because the trim takes quite a bit of time to apply. The trim for such a small surface area takes longer to paint than the red orange of the armor through all 3 layers of highlights. So the metallic that I'm using, it doesn't matter too much, but I'm using Vallejo Metal Color Exhaust Manifold, but you could use whatever sort of equivalent metallic that you like. It really doesn't matter too much. I do like these because I can paint with them straight. I don't have to thin them. They are very nice. They're supposed to be airbrush paints, but they flow very nicely, and you can just paint straight from the pot if you like. Also, to help with that, I've decanted mine from the original bottle into the kind of old school Games Workshop style flip top pots, so I literally can paint straight from the pot when I do this. And so then it's just a case of painting all of them. If you want your Blood Angels to be like a little bit more accurate in terms of backstory or whatever, then probably all of your trim should be gold. I'm just going to be painting the shoulder pad, the top, the neck guard sections of the shoulder pads in gold, because it just makes it a bit more interesting. I'm also going to get a few other colours wrong in terms of being accurate for the lore, so it'll be up to you if you change them or not. I'm going to talk about those as I go through. You can see there I'm using I think it was Viking gold. It's either Viking gold or Necro gold, but it's scale 75 metallics. I might use both actually, but it doesn't matter too much. Again, use your gold of preference. I just find these are quite nice for coverage, and I happen to have them laying around, but kind of any gold metallic paint will do, because I'm not going to be spending a long time on this. So there's all the metal areas covered, and the model is now, if you want, you can game with it at this stage. It all looks pretty fine. It's kind of high contrast. The metallics stand out a bit. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be giving it a wash all over. So if you've seen some of my other videos, I do this quite often, and it's dark oath flesh, and then I mix it with more contrast medium, so it's diluting it. Don't use contrast paint mixed with water to do this, because it will defeat the properties of the paint will not work in the same way. So if you just thin it with water, you might as well just use thinned paint to do it, because the paint won't flow into the recesses and it won't have a smooth finish. What you'll find when you do this is, after you've covered the whole model and it dries, is that it'll have a very matte, even finish over the whole piece. But also, because of the thinned down dark oath flesh, it sort of ties all the colours together. It's like a filter, really. So it ties all the colours together. It sort of adds shading to the metallics. It adds shading to the armour. It desaturates the armour a little bit as well, because of the brown element on top. Knocking the colour back, which is also what I want to happen for when I apply highlights later on, because it'll make the highlights stand out more, and because it's knocking the red back, it's less red and more orange, because I'm going to be highlighting with orange later on. You can see while I'm applying the contrast paint that I'm using quite a large brush to do it. It means that I can cover the model very quickly, so that the paint isn't drying in any area before I finish covering the whole model. So this then allows me, when I've got paint all over it, to quickly check to see if there's any pooling. So if there is pooling, you clean your brush off in your water jar, wipe it against your kitchen roll or whatever it is, and then just touch the pool area. The paint will then flow back into the brush. You can clean it off again. And so because you don't want to leave any of the excess contrast paint on the model, when contrast paint dries, it's a little bit thicker than water, but also it does, because the medium itself is a bit thicker, it does actually leave a physical residue behind when it dries. So you can have you can obscure detail with it by leaving the pooling. So now we're going to be working on the eyes. The eyes are going to go through a few stages on the model. If at any point you prefer the look of the eyes at that stage compared to how they look at the end, then it's perfectly fine to use that stage and leave it there. So I changed my mind a little bit on how I'm going to do the eyes as I go along. So I had an idea in mind, and then I thought I kind of adapted it. So you might find the end result is a little bit weird, but generally speaking, if you're doing OSL, to make OSL work, it has to be in a dark environment. If the OSL is on a direct light source area, so like say the model's out in sunlight, in universe in sunlight, because you're painting light volumes onto the model, or will be anyway. So if the glowing eye, it's like turning on a torch on when you're out in the daylight. It doesn't affect anything. So if you have a glowing eye on a helmet and it's outside in the sun, it won't glow. You'll be able to maybe see a bit of colour on it or whatever, but that's it. You won't have an OSL effect. So to make the OSL effect work, it has to be in a darker or shaded part of the model. So you can see the eye here. So it's his right eye, but we're looking at it on the from the left as we look straight on. It looks a little bit weird on that side. Well, it looks a bit weird on both sides. Yeah, just to go over the colours, so I'm using Sotek green, and then I've added ice yellow to it. So you can see 3 colours there on the right of the wet palette. I've also got some lighter versions, just slightly off the top, that I didn't angle the camera correctly for. So the first thing I did was paint the eyes in ice yellow, so it had a light base colour. Then I covered them in Sotek green. Then because Sotek green also has pretty poor coverage, but it's really, really nice for glazing, and it's also just a colour that I really like. And so this is technically the wrong colour for Blood Angels. They're supposed to have green eyes, and although it's called Sotek green, it's more like turquoisey blue. But adding the ice yellow to it does push the green element a bit more. However, the glowing part underneath the eye, so the eyes themselves are going to be the light source, and then the glow, the OSL part, goes underneath the eyes. But when you apply that on top of the red, it makes it look darker. So what I aim to do is to make it more effective is at the end of the video I turn one half of the face to be directly lit, so I completely remove pretty much the OSL on the left hand side of the face as we look at it, and then I create more shadow on the right hand side of the face, so the blue element, or the Sotek green element, looks more like it's lighter. So it's a very asymmetrical look to it. If you don't like that, that's fine, but just be aware, if you want OSL to work like technically correctly, then you need it to be in a dark environment for the light to show up, or the light source has to be stronger than the light hitting the piece anyway. So you can see there where I painted in the Sotek glow under the eyes to start with. As I said, it makes it look a little bit darker. If you do multiple layers of that and you build up the Sotek green so it becomes completely opaque, it will get lighter anyway. But what you can see that I did instead was I went through some of the highlight variations, painted those on top, especially on the rim just before the eyes, and painted those lighter, and then I can go back with the Sotek green and paint over them, so that will kind of blend. It'll make the Sotek green look stronger and lighter because of the translucency. You see some of the paint showing through underneath, and then but it still becomes more like the Sotek knocks that back. So you don't want the trim or the glow itself to be as bright as the light source, because it's the glow that shows the color of the light, whereas the light source on the eyes really just go up to white. I've left and you can see what I'm doing is I'm just going to go through the layers of highlights. So remember, it's Sotek green, and then adding ice yellow with varying amounts, and just off the top of the wet palette, the final highlight is ice yellow followed by then pure white, and use whatever white you prefer. I tend to use P3 Morrow White, but it really doesn't matter too much. So you'll have an element of colour at the very edges of the eye lenses, but most of the eye will be white. What you're also going to find with this model in particular, and most of the Mark III models, is they have this little cap that goes over the top of the eyes. You can see there, it creates shadow, which looks pretty cool, but the issue with that is, because the eyes are sunken anyway, and then there's a sort of like this cap on top causing shadow underneath, that even when you take the eyes up to pure white, it'll look duller because there's a shadow there. So then the eyes are never quite in direct light. So that is a problem. It's just something that you have to deal with. But as long as you've got the eyes white enough, they should still stand out, because the area around them is quite dark. They're just not going to be. They just won't pop like maybe you're hoping, as if they were a real energy source. But clearly, it's just paint, so it won't work like that. So you should have something that looks similar to this after you've gone up to white, with the two eyes in the helmet, and then kind of these sort of Sotek green glowing edges at the bottom. At the moment they're still a little bit too bright. I was kind of in two minds on whether to highlight them as bright as this or take it darker, but because, as you can see from this angle, the cap hides the eyes themselves so much, I kind of felt that I wanted to show the edges of the eyes a bit more, but it makes it look a bit weird. You can, so if you don't want to do what I'm going to do to the marine at the end of the video with the eyes, and you just prefer this kind of look but you don't want it to be so extreme, just carry on with the Sotek green or Sotek blue, no, Sotek green, it just looks blue, glazing over the lower section, and glaze towards the top part of the eye. Maybe thin the paint as well, 50-50 water paint or whatever, and then you start wherever you want the glow to be, as far out as you want it to be, and then glaze towards the eye, and stop before you hit the lens, because you don't want to go over the white lens, but up to the edge highlight, because you've already highlighted up to the edge highlight. As you glaze over it, it will still stay lighter, and you just have to be a little bit careful and control your brush as you do it. But you can knock it back while still having a sort of a stronger color transition from lighter near the eye lens itself, and then darker down the cheeks. But ultimately, really, if you want the eyes to work more effectively still, you don't want to have much orange at all visible on the face. So ideally the face plate, like especially over the mouth section, would be a lot darker than this to make the eye glow look more effective. So now moving on to the gun, and I've started off with a Rhinox hide brown type color on the bolter, and I'm just sort of like blocking in quickly all over. Now you don't have to do this stage if you don't want, and indeed if you had used a grey colour over the gun to start with for blocking in some of the highlight positions, and then done the contrast with Dark Oath Flesh over the top, you'd get kind of like a similar result. But this just helps with a kind of grimy kind of effect. So if you plan it a bit better than I did, then you don't have to use the brown as a base colour, and then you can go straight, you can just use a sort of like a mid darkish grey. If you take like a neutral grey colour, block in the highlight positions, and then when you do the Dark Oath wash over the top, you can then use that same colour as a highlight, because remember the Dark Oath Flesh wash will dull it down, so the same colour that you used before is now lighter over the top of the same colour that's been washed. So all you're doing here is just picking out the upwards facing edges with neutral grey. What you're going to find is neutral grey is a little bit too strong compared to the Rhinox hide. It's like a massive tonal jump between the two. So what I actually ended up doing, because I thought I'd just very quickly sort of block it in with some of these marks, but it's too high contrast between the two. So I went and mixed some of the Rhinox hide in with the neutral grey. You can see here I'm just putting in random scratches and things like that. But the main reason is, so the neutral grey that I used on this, it's one of the AK neutral grey paints, whereas before I'd used the Vallejo neutral grey paint, and it turns out that the AK neutral grey is lighter and more opaque than the Vallejo neutral grey paint, so it didn't quite respond in the way I was expecting. It was a little bit harsher with the marks, so you see these little scratches I painted in very, very hard looking on there, and so I had to go and fix that. So if you're using Vallejo neutral grey, you probably will get away without having to do so much blending that I'm going to have to be doing here. But like I say, if you just take the neutral grey, you mix it with some of the Rhinox hide, so it's just, you've got like a mid colour between the two, so you can just blend in sections on the gun so it doesn't look quite so harsh and sort of ridiculous looking with these very like strong marks. But don't spend too long doing this. I got a little bit carried away on the gun, but as long as you block in all the highlight positions and get a little bit of transition there, and it should only take a couple of minutes really to do it. If you then go in with some Rhinox hide and thin it down a little bit, so it's about 4 parts water to 1 part paint, you can glaze over the body of the gun, going from pretty much covering the whole of the gun. But you have to, when you glaze, you load up the brush with the thinned down paint, rub it off on your kitchen roll. So the brush is only damp, then you just glaze it on the flat surface in like very smooth, even strokes, covering as much area as possible in one stroke. Try not to go over the same brush mark again when you do the second mark, because the paint will start to dry and then you start lifting off a bit, so it doesn't become as smooth if you do that. So the fewer marks when you're glazing, the better. But that glazing with Rhinox hide, or you can use Abaddon black, both are really nice for that kind of glazing effect. Going over the scratches and some of the dodgy looking transition that I've done there will make it look a lot duller and a smoother transition, so it'll neaten up most of the bad painting that you want, and then you can go back again with the neutral grey and just pick out some of the edge highlights again if it needs doing. So really a lot of the stuff there that I've done is a little bit more fiddly than I really intended, but at the same time the gun does now stand out, or it will, by the time I finish, it will stand out more than, or stand out from the armour, making it look a little bit more interesting again. But ultimately you could do this a lot quicker. You could almost really, if you painted the gun black, then if you took the neutral grey and you wiped it all off and turned it into sort of like a dry brush and did like if you use a large brush and do vertical strikes downwards, so the upper edges of things get caught anyway, then when you give it the coat of Dark Oath Flesh contrast paint, it's not going to look too bad if you do it that way. So that will be a lot quicker to do, and then you can still tidy it up at the end afterwards, maybe with a bit of glazing or whatever. So here you can see I'm glazing on the Rhinox hide. This will make it a lot neater and take away a lot of these nasty little marks that I've painted on that just stand out too much. And I mean, ultimately you can spend as long as you want doing this sort of painting with these kind of marks. So if you wanted to take this to a very, very high level, all the processes that I'm using here for painting the gun, even painting the armor really, you can start out like this and just spend longer doing each section, getting really, really focused, especially the armor highlights towards the end of the video. You can do a lot with those and spend hours and hours. You could easily spend 100 hours or more on this model if you wanted, using the techniques I'm going to be using and just pushing it to an ultra refined kind of state, or adding more scratches or whatever. So on this particular model I don't actually add much in the way of weathering, so there's no streaking or chipping or anything like that. You could literally spend hours and hours doing all that all over the model, making super refined chipping, because that would then fit in, it still fits in nicely with the whole theme and atmosphere that I'm painting anyway. So there you can see I spent a little bit more time just blending in. So remember, most of anything that you see there that's blended in now, I've literally just mixed the Rhinox hide with some of the neutral grey just to help blend it, and then tweaked a few areas here and there. And then if you want as well, you can see where I painted in the scratches using the neutral grey. Well, I'm just quickly glazing in a little bit of black at the very top of the section of the gun. Like all this kind of stuff is optional, it's just excess tweaking, but I'm just pushing the contrast a little bit there because I've made the gun look a bit grey. So painting up towards the highlight sections, painting up towards the top edge highlight pushes the contrast, makes the edge highlight stand out a bit more, and makes the gun look a bit more black because I'm using black, going from about halfway down the gun up to the top and then taking the brush off. Then you can see I just picked a lighter colour, so that was the neutral grey mixed with, well, you can mix with white or ice yellow depending on what you fancy. If you use ice yellow, then it'll probably match in a little bit more with the other highlights on the model, with that kind of yellowy look to it. And then I've gone back with the black, and I'm just painting in some recess looks to the scratches. So if I've painted in a neutral grey line scratch, so you can see this best on the top edge of the gun there, then I've painted a black line just above that, and that also breaks the top edge, so it looks like the model, that section of the model has been scratched and it's created a gouge into it. So finally here, just on the gun, just picking out a few dots here and there with the metal color exhaust manifold. This is optional as well because I'm not going to be painting in the rivets on, or studs, whatever they are, on the rest of the model. But I just thought, just to add a bit of detail to the gun. It's always a case when you're painting something like this, and it's a problem for me anyway, is that when I'm going along and I see details and I just want to start painting everything, but it's not really suitable if you want to get something done quickly for gaming. So it's up to you if you want to pick out these certain elements. At this stage as well now, you can also highlight the metal parts after they've been covered with the Dark Oath Flesh contrast paint. So again, because the metal color paint is so fluid, I can paint from it straight out of the pot. And what you're doing is you're just painting in the light volumes again. So for example, if you're painting this as non-metallic metal, you would paint the same highlight positions as I'm doing now, but because it's with true metals, you can be a little bit sloppier with how you apply it. Now I don't mean to say just slap the paint on there, but you can make it sort of like more scratchy and a little bit more uneven, because there is a shine element still visible from the first layer of metallic paint. It's just been dulled down because of the Dark Oath Flesh. So this is just layering on top of it, and it works quite nicely, but there's still like the midtones and even into the shadows, the metallics still show through. So you don't have to be quite as precise to make the highlights work. And also because so I want to stress why it's optional or not. If you prefer the really dirty, grimy look to the metals, it might be an idea just to paint these highlights on the top section, top curve of the barrel there on the gun, and then you leave the rest. So like on the backpack exhausts here, they have like a patina on them almost, that you might like to keep. So don't feel obliged to paint in any of these highlights. It's purely just pushing the contrast and making certain details stand out a little bit more. You could actually go, if you want, and go the opposite way. So instead of highlighting it, all the metal parts to make little shiny sections on, you can shade it down even more. Now you can do that with the contrast paint, so you can do multiple layers on it, but you can kind of like glaze with the contrast paint as well. So instead of flooding the area and then taking off the excess, you just paint it on, and paint it into the recesses and the darker areas and shadow parts, like the underside of the curves of the exhaust sections on the backpack, that kind of thing. And that will just push that grimy kind of look, but because it's a contrast paint, it will still have the translucent effect, so some of the metallics will still show through, and it sort of like, it works more like a shadow. However, I decide, because I'm painting on the highlight sections with the metallics to make it shiny, but I still decided that I want to add some shadow sections. So again, a little bit later on in the video, I'll turn some of the Rhinox hide into a glaze, although Rhinox hide, you can use that as a glaze with slightly thicker paint, so it is again quite a translucent paint, so it's a little bit more common with the layer paints from Games Workshop. They tend to be more translucent. So it's probably not even 50-50 water to paint, but I do paint that on the underside. I mean, you'll see when I paint it, like the underside of the barrel and the underside of the exhaust sections on the backpack as well, and anywhere else. I also use it on the armour, but again, all these elements will be shown in the video coming up. So same again for the metal, and I'm pretty sure it was Necro gold, but if you rewind the video to the beginning and check, you'll see for yourself whether it was Necro gold or Viking gold. But again, like, the actual gold doesn't matter too much, but it's the same process again of picking out the kind of like the edges and the light volume sections where the light catches it. So an easy way of doing this is just holding the model under a lamp to see how the light hits it, and obviously bearing in mind that the light moves as you rotate the model. You have to pick a section that you like the look of, holding it in a certain position, and then paint those highlights on. Fill in the same block of highlight size, so it's not just a case of painting in an edge highlight, it's painting in the whole section of where the light hits it. And the reason you're doing that is because that also matches the style of highlighting on the armor. So as you can see, I'm not doing any edge highlighting on the orange armor. It's purely light volume highlights. So now this is where you can actually get lost for hours and hours if you're not careful, but you can see there are three kind of orange colours on the wet palette. So I've got the Troll Slayer orange, then I have Troll Slayer orange mixed with white, and Troll Slayer orange mixed with even more white. And the really light one, where it's more white than Troll Slayer orange really, I would probably say you don't even really need that. I put that there just in case I wanted to pick out some of the rivets and things, which are just handy because on the chest area, because that's so heavily lit to one side, the rivet kind of blends into that section. So, and because the rivet would catch more light, because it's it's a very sharp like detailed area, so that will look shinier than like a flat area. Then just the light color, so just small areas like that you would use the lighter orange highlight. You're also going to be seeing here on the left side of the face now how I'm going to be pushing the highlight from that side, and then eventually the right hand side of the face will get dulled down. You're going to see the glow from the eye on the left here will also kind of vanish. All the marks that I'm doing like this are sort of stippling and glazing. Now the reason I say stippling and glazing is because I started off stippling and then I changed my mind as we went along. So the stippling takes a little bit longer, but it does keep it similar with the stippled effect from earlier on before the contrast paint was applied. However, because it takes longer and I wanted to get this done a little bit more quickly, I now switch over to just painting it in sort of normally with like layers. So you can see here I've just gone back now to the Troll Slayer orange, and I'm looking where the paint sort of landed with the stippling effect with the large dry, or the small dry brush, but it was like a large brush, right? So the front of the shoulder pads, the chest there, and the side of the head, all those kind of sections, and the top of the arm guard as well. So I've started painting it on more like a glaze. Now because the Troll Slayer orange has such poor coverage, you can't thin this down much at all. So it's depending, it does depend very heavily on how thick your paint is from the pot. So I've got two Troll Slayer orange pots. One of them I've had for quite a while, there's not much paint left in it, and that's now very thick because the paint started to evaporate in it, so I do have to thin that down. The other one that's quite, well, it's brand new, but I've opened it anyway, is the paint is a lot thinner in it. so that takes hardly any thinning to be able to do this effect. So you just have to, when you're thinning the paint, you're looking for something that's fluid, it flows, but it will still cover the area. What I found with the Troll Slayer orange is if you take it past more than 2 parts water to 1 part paint, or around about that anyway, you have incredibly diminishing returns for how how smooth you can make it into, but still getting some coverage. Because I wanted to get the paint coverage on there, and once you go past that, that 2 parts water to 1 part paint with the Troll Slayer orange, you're basically pushing water around, slightly dirty water, which is fine if you're doing a Golden Demon piece and you want to spend a couple of 100 hours on a piece making everything perfectly smooth and finished. But if you're painting like a tabletop piece, then that Troll Slayer orange glazing is not the way to go. So don't thin the paint too much, probably, but it does depend on how thick your paint is when you thin it. The best advice I give for this is to just practice, see what marks you get, test it on your thumb, because that's quite a nice surface, your thumbnail. See if it leaves like a translucent orange layer that you can control easily and flows nicely off the brush. So here you're going to see a bit where I'm going to take away the glow from the eye on the left hand side. So I'm still using the Troll Slayer orange, and you're doing brush marks towards the lightest part of the face mask. Now, because of the charity event that I painted this for, I had to freehand the moustache onto the faceplate. So while I was highlighting up the face, I did suddenly realize that it's going to be quite hard to make the moustache visible, because my idea was with the Blood Angels being kind of like an artistic, creative legion of Space Marines, that if they were going to have a moustache painted onto their faceplate, that it would be very much like the sort of filigree that they have on other parts of their armour. So you can see various Blood Angels say they love gold filigree and stuff like that. So I decided to paint the moustache as gold filigree, kind of like a non-metallic metal sort of style gold filigree. The problem is, though, that because the orange, we take the highlights up with the orange, it gets very close to the lighter kind of goldy sort of look to it, which means that you can't make it stand out very nicely on there. So I wouldn't take the highlights too bright. But what you can do is that when you're painting in these highlights with the Troll Slayer orange mixed with the small amount of white here, so you can see how pale it is. Once you've done that, if you then go back with the Troll Slayer orange that you've thinned slightly, you can paint over the top of that, and because you're painting over a lighter base, it will push the orange element, it'll make it lighter, but it'll sort of knock it down a bit as well, so it will blend in better. So glazing is really handy for that kind of thing, and it's actually like a standard way of painting that people use very often, is that you can over highlight something, just very quickly block in the highlights, get sort of a bit of a rough transition going, and it will look very stark and sort of nasty looking. But if you then get the glaze colour that you actually want the armour to be, you can glaze over the top of that section, it'll knock back the colours, everything will sort of blend together, and you increase the saturation while you're painting over the top of a lighter base colour. So that's kind of all that I want to do to the armour at this stage. And you can see I'd already started on the eye there, where I've sort of knocked back the left hand side and started making the right hand side glow. The right hand side is going to look a little bit weird all the way until the end of the video. It's still the same processes that I did when I started off painting the eye. So here you can see, and this was the reason I said that's pretty much all I want to do to the armour is I started painting in these light spots on there. And I mean, you can add them in if you want, but I just decided they were a bit too much. So I actually go back with the sort of the Troll Slayer orange again. So I mean, it does work, that process where you can paint in these highlights, and then you go back to the Troll Slayer orange, or the Troll Slayer orange with a small amount of white, whichever you prefer, then glaze over the top of these bright spot highlights that I'm putting on, and it will knock them down, and it'll still be a lighter area, and you'll create the transition and it'll look smoother. But don't forget that every layer or successive layer of Troll Slayer orange that you paint over the top will also knock back the previous highlight layers that you've already glazed down. So it's up to you how you want to do it. You could just end up with something, if you're not careful, of lots of Troll Slayer glazes ending up in an opaque Troll Slayer orange Blood Angel. So now what I'm doing is, and this is what I mentioned earlier in the video, using some Rhinox hide to darken sections down, particularly on the right hand side of the face there, but also the right hand side of the chest, the underside of the kneecaps, the legs. Well, the one leg that leads backwards, so it goes underneath him, most of that can be filled in with Rhinox hide. When I say filled in, I don't mean an opaque layer of Rhinox hide. The Rhinox hide is thinned a little bit anyway, and it doesn't have amazing coverage, so it's, I'll say 1.5 parts water to 1 part paint, and you can see there as I apply it, it looks quite thin. But I am using a slightly larger brush, so this is a size 1 brush, but it's a custom brush that I'm testing, but it's roughly equivalent to a size 1 Artist Opus brush, and then I swap actually over to a size 1 Artist Opus brush. But whatever you do, a larger brush will increase the translucency of the layer, because it sort of dilutes the paint even more, because the large brush holds more dampness. So when you have your mix on your palette, you add the brush to that, the dampness in the brush then dissipates the paint that goes into it anyway, so you get naturally a more dilute paint by using a larger brush. You could see there as well, I was going back again with the Sotek green and then glazing over the right hand side of the face. So if you look on the left hand side of the face now, you can see there's hardly any of the Sotek green now visible. Then on the right hand side it's mostly Sotek green, and you can just see how it fades in a little bit and just underneath where the eye goes. So now it's quite clear that the eye is the bright light source, even though you can't see it because of the lip from the cap. But you get that sort of bluey green turquoise look to the face on the right hand side. There's a tiny hint of it on the left hand side, just as I tilt the head back, every now and then you get a flash of the eyes, so you can see how the eyes are the light source from the OSL, and how, remember how I mentioned that the OSL wouldn't work if there's a direct light source on it. So on the left hand side of the face there, you can see that the light from the environment is overpowering the OSL effect. So how it kind of works out is that you get an OSL effect on one side of the face that's in shadow, on the other side you don't get an OSL effect, so it makes it very asymmetrical. It looks kind of interesting, I think. Like I say, it's up to you if you want to go with that look or not. So now the bit that I'm doing is the freehand moustache, entirely optional. Like I said, I painted this on as part of the charity event thing, so I think it looks kind of fun, but I can understand if you don't want to include that on your model. The tricky part of this is to make it symmetrical on both sides. I was almost tempted to just have the moustache on one side, because I think that kind of asymmetry looks quite cool as well, along with the OSL on that side. If you do want to do that, then just glaze a little bit of Sotek green, very thin Sotek green, over the top. I used some AK colours for doing the freehand moustache bit. So there's ice yellow, there is light brown, golden brown, and golden brown and light brown. So 3 colours. I would say you don't need to use the AK colours at all if you don't want to, and probably if you use something like Balor brown, Vallejo ice yellow, and Mornfang brown, something like that, maybe XV88, you would get a very similar result as well. Whatever company's colours you use, because of those particular colours, the opacity is pretty good. The main thing for painting this freehand on is that it's easier to do if the paint is pretty opaque, because it means you can do the line work quickly within like one stroke. The more strokes that you have to make, the more chance that you're going to get that the line is going to be slightly broken or inconsistent. So if you can do it in one neat even line, then it's going to look better. When you do work like this, when you're going to see that I'm going to mess it up, the reason I'm messing it up is because I'm trying to paint it so that you can see it on the camera. When you do this sort of work, you need to use the very tip of the brush, and you need to be facing directly to the part that you're painting. So when I'm painting it, I'm kind of looking at it face on, so I'm painting at it as it curves away from me. It's really hard to get the sort of accuracy that you need when doing that kind of thing, but I think you get the idea of what it is I'm doing anyway, where you can see I'm using the tip of the brush and things like that. However, when I painted the left hand side on, I didn't quite get it symmetrical with the right. If you end up in a similar sort of situation and you want to fix this, you need to create a new base color. Now the problem is, because of all the layers that we've painted on the orange side for the base colour, it's going to be tricky to colour match that. So what I suggest is that you use the Rhinox hide and you mix in some Troll Slayer orange with it. You might need a couple of those just to get one slightly darker and one slightly lighter, because as you can see the colour does fade out as it curves around to the left, and then you can use that as kind of like a rubber, and once you've sort of rubbed off or like painted over really the section that's gone wrong, you can even use it to paint underneath and all sorts, you know, the lower edge, or cut into the edges as well to neaten them up. Whatever it is that you've had to do, you're probably going to see some of the brush marks there. When you've done that, you'll need to go back with the Troll Slayer orange on its own. It might be that you do a bit of stippling with it, or it might be that you still need to add a tiny amount of Rhinox hide just to dull it down a little bit. But what I find is that the stippling effect will help you to blend it in. If you use slightly thicker paint to start with, just to knock the faults off that you've painted, and then you thin that colour down again, so you turn it into like a thick glaze, so around about 2 parts water to 1 part paint. If you then stipple over it carefully, it will sort of blend the whole section in again. So it is a tricky thing to get this right, especially if you're recording it for video. But like if I was doing it straight off without having to worry about recording it, the main thing is just to focus on trying to get that symmetrical look, you know, so getting both sides the same. I'm highlighting the left up, so if you're just painting it and you don't care about highlighting it, you just want to do the freehand design, then just going in with the golden brown or the equivalent with Balor brown, just free-handing the whole thing with that colour will be fine. It might be that the XV88 is better on the right-hand side because it's a slightly darker side. But you know, those colours, they're the easiest ones to do the freehand with. The lighter the colour, so when it goes up to ice yellow, that makes it a lot harder to freehand, just because of the white pigment particles within the paint. So you're more likely to get like a slightly rougher line when you use those really light colours. However you do it, the consistency of the paint, you want it, it's a very kind of like fine line, excuse the pun, of getting the consistency right between having it too thick and too thin. You need that kind of like Goldilocks zone, because you want the paint thin enough that it flows off the brush smoothly, but thick enough that it makes a harsh or like a clear sharp line. If you have the paint diluted a little bit too much, the consistency will be a bit thin, and you'll be able to make the line, but it'll be a translucent line, so it won't be an opaque mark, and you'll have to go over it multiple times. But that, you know, you can do that, it's just you have to be a little bit careful with the brush control. If you try and you make the paint too thick, you will just find that the paint won't flow off the brush, and then you'll be left just getting cross, because it'll sort of like, it'll clump up, the paint will stop flowing, it won't make an even line, it'll probably be a bit bumpy and then just stop flowing and you get nothing coming off the brush. That using too thick paint also damages the brush tip quicker. Then, so you can see when I painted the highlights on with the ice yellow, I still managed to mess them up while trying to record it. So again, I had to go back using the mixes with the Troll Slayer orange and the tiny bit of Rhinox hide, just to clean up the top and bottom sections either side of the line as well. And then, so just finally here, you can see I'm just glazing the Sotek green over the freehand side on the right hand side. So again, it makes it look like the OSL is going over that section. And it also darkens it down a bit as well. Also, just in case you're wondering about the awful transfer work, the decals on it, I've literally just popped those on, and then I've put some micro set on it. So they're wet at the moment and waiting for those to set. If you wait till the photo at the end, you'll see where I've actually managed to set them onto the model, and then I just did a little bit of stippling over the top using the base color armour with some chipping effect, and I also used some contrast medium without any colour in it. So contrast medium, because it leaves the same finish as the Dark Oath Flesh, when I painted that over, it blends the decal or transfer into the armour colour base. So there you can see you get like a very smooth flat finish, and it looks like the same finish as the rest of the paintwork. And indeed, if any part of the model is too shiny or too matte, just use the contrast medium to glaze over the top with it, and that will then make all the armour panels the same finish. And that's what it looks like there when I've spent a little bit of time tweaking it to just finish a few areas off. Put the base on as well. Very, very simple base. It's literally just sand Agrax Earthshade, and a bit of weathering powder, and that's it. That's the end of the video. So I put the link to the charity at the bottom in the description, but that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.